Welcome to the fifth and final round of the Halifax Spring Chess Festival. It has taken me a little bit longer to get all of these video recaps out for you. You know, life happens and here we are. But I wanted to shoot a video about this one because this game is just a little bit weird, and I don't know, I find it a little unsettling somehow. I think it's because my goal in chess is with every game that I don't win, I want to make sure that I learn something that I can do better next time. And with this game, I'm just kind of struggling to understand it well enough, I think, to figure out like what I could have done differently and what I could have done better. So to take a step back for a second, when I was playing the tournament and the pairings came out, I looked at who my opponent was going to be, and I looked at how they had been doing previously in the tournament, and they had already gotten several draws in their previous rounds. And so I was already kind of thinking, like, maybe they're playing in a way that is draw-ish, that they're kind of going for trying to make a draw in a bunch of their games. And so I wanted to avoid that, especially because they were rated just a little bit lower than me. Like, we're probably around the same skill level, to be honest, but I had a little bit of a higher rating. So I thought, you know, I should be able to push for something here and get a win in this game if I really try for it. But as you may have guessed by now, I was not successful. In any case, it was an interesting game, and there may be some interesting ideas for you if you find yourself in a position like what my opponent was in, where they wanted to play for a draw. Like, some of the ways that they tried to trade things off and kind of sterilize the position could be something that you might find useful in future games. But also, selfishly, I'm pretty interested to hear your thoughts on my play as well. Could I have found a better plan? Could I have found a way to add more imbalance and complication into the game and potentially play for a win? So stick with me, it's a pretty interesting one. Let's dive in. I was playing with the black pieces, and my opponent started with knight f3, which is the righty opening. And I don't really know how to play against this, but for most things that aren't e4, I just play the King's Indian defense, so that's what I went into here. And it started off looking pretty symmetrical, and then my opponent played b3. So they are evidently going to go for sort of this double fianchetto setup. And one of the things that I really don't want generally in the King's Indian is for this dark squared bishop to get traded off, because it's an important defender of my king. It can potentially be quite powerful looking along that long diagonal. And I just kind of feel like putting the bishop on b2 makes it more likely that those bishops are going to get traded off at some point. So already I'm kind of seeing how this game is going to end up, you know, potentially trading a lot of pieces and going toward a draw. And I don't want that. So anyway, I continued on with my typical development and played sort of a typical King's Indian defense setup. Now, I kind of wonder here, actually, and I haven't looked at the opening theory very much, but I wonder if d5 would have been better. Because in this position, neither of us have really tried to claim any space in the center of the board, right? And with the King's Indian, typically you're waiting for, I don't know, something to go in the middle so that you can then kind of expand in the middle and try to sort of attack whatever is happening in the middle. But I wonder if something more of a almost Grunfeld kind of style would have been better. Maybe even eventually with c5 and I end up kind of with a reverse Catalan kind of setup with black. I don't know. I sort of wonder if that might have been a better plan or a better direction kind of in this opening. But I didn't. I just stuck with my typical King's Indian and kind of thinking at this point, maybe even e5 would work well and kind of blunt that bishop. Of course, it kind of blunts mine as well. So I don't really know. That's what I went with. d4, and then actually I played c5. And I don't know if this was the right move either. My thought was often against these sort of fianchettoed setups over here, especially in something like the, you know, the English or something like that, where the c-pawn moves out early, I tend to like to try to expand on the queen side. And I was just kind of thinking maybe that's the plan here. Maybe expansion on the queen side could have been the way to kind of cause some kind of complications or open up some targets for attack or something like that. The other nice thing about the c5 move is it means I can get this knight out to c6 without blocking in this pawn as well. And that's another thing that I like to do. Rather than putting the knight on d7, I like to put it on c6. So it's just kind of one more piece along this diagonal so things don't get opened up and cause problems quite as quickly, maybe. In any case, white castled, and I played bishop d7. And I guess my thought was maybe I will put the bishop on c6 and see if I can actually trade off their light squared bishop. So in the same way that I don't want them to trade off my dark squared bishop, which is defending my king, I want to get rid of this light squared bishop. And so maybe this is a way to do it. This can also help with expansion over on this side of the board. So it just seems like a good place to develop my bishop. After they played c4, I didn't want to put the bishop here because they could just push the pawn and lock things down and attack the bishop. So instead I captured, and then I brought out my knight, and I'm thinking that I'm, threatening to trade there and then put my bishop on c6, or if they trade, which I believe, yes, that they did, now my bishop is threatening to make that trade, and that's exactly what I did. And so I've gotten rid of their light squared bishop, which kind of feels like it should be good for me. I should be able to, somehow take advantage of the light squares around the king, maybe. But at the same time, we've already traded off quite a few minor pieces, right? So I don't know, probably this was not really the right plan, and the game is already kind of looking like it's moving toward a draw kind of scenario. So in this position, I played queen d7, and I think I was just, thinking like that could come with a check at some point if it's useful, and this connects my rooks. But I wasn't really sure what the plan was in this position. Like I said, we've just traded off a bunch of things and just not quite sure where to go from here. I think one thing that I had looked at is knight e4. And this would have been interesting because if white captures, then I can capture. And now this starts to look like sort of a nice imbalance maybe in my favor. I don't know what the engine gives it, plus 0.2. So like it's still pretty even. Like there's objectively not really an advantage for black, but it just at least feels like maybe there's something that can be done in this position. But one issue is if I play knight e4, what about just something like that? Queen c2, right? And then, if I say I take or something like that, and then maybe that gets traded off, this doesn't look very good to me. Like we've traded off more stuff and now my bishop is gone and I'm just not seeing much that can be done in this position. So instead I played this queen d7 move, which I don't know that accomplished very much. Queen d2, kind of similar. I delivered a check, not that it does much good, I guess. Technically, it also means that my knight can go there and be defended by the queen. So maybe I was kind of thinking about something like that, but that's not actually what I did. I ended up moving my rook over here. And I think my idea now is, all right, this is a pawn break that I could do. And technically there's this pawn break as well. I don't remember whether I thought about that one very much, but this pawn break seems like it could be a good one. I could kind of break things open in the middle, get my rooks centralized, maybe push this pawn at some point and see if I can get something rolling. But kind of the problem was with anything that I tried, white just had a very simple move just to block it. So now this push doesn't work anymore. And I don't remember whether I considered something like e6. I'm not sure that works particularly well. For one thing, like pushing e6 and then d5 means that I could potentially end up with an isolated pawn, which I don't necessarily want, especially with this kind of big battery coming down toward it. So I didn't do that. I played queen c5 instead, with the idea of pinning this pawn and then maybe being able to pile up on it with the knight. And once again, white just simply had one simple little move that completely ruins this plan for me. So again, I found myself not really knowing what to do. I moved my rook over just for fun, and white moved their rook over. I came over here with the queen because, like, technically I could attack that pawn. Of course, white can defend it really quickly, but like back here, I think I was calculating maybe I have a tactic along this diagonal, right? And so if I bring the queen out and then I can put the bishop here, then this is sort of a skewer. But I did it anyway, just because it seemed like, maybe it would cause something interesting. But of course, it's very easily blocked by just pushing that pawn. And I think I was calculating that even just pushing that pawn would do it. But, and actually here, I think the engine, this is the only place where the engine considers what I did to be sort of a mistake, because apparently the best move was just to put the bishop back, which I don't know the difference between just putting the bishop back and bringing this queen over here. Basically, the eval for pretty much this whole game was right around 0. Like, nothing particularly interesting happened on the eval bar. I'll just put it up there so you can see what it looked like. It's pretty much flat. Like, there are a couple little bumps, but it's pretty much flat. Like, nothing particularly interesting ended up coming of any of our moves in this game. So anyway, I played queen over, and then my opponent starts trying to trade queens. And so it's like they're totally trying to go for a draw here. And I stubbornly tried to decline for a while. So I gave a check, and I decided, maybe I can do this pawn break and kind of try to break things up. They come in with the knight. I just put the bishop back on a more useful square. A knight gets traded, and then I'm pretty sure my bishop is going to get traded. If I take the bishop off of that diagonal, then I potentially have lots of problems. So I just brought the queen up, traded that way, because I didn't want, I could have, let's see, back here, I could have initiated the trade myself, but I just felt like there was no reason to allow the white queen on that diagonal. Maybe that would have been better. I don't know. But in any case, we did it this way. And then once again, looking for a queen trade and declining. And then finally here, and I honestly, I don't really remember what I was thinking, but I decided here, now was the time to go ahead with the queen trade. And this seems kind of silly, because after the trade, now, along with everything else, the pawn structure is symmetrical. And I feel like there's just like no life in the position whatsoever. So like maybe there was a better plan here, but I wasn't finding it, right? Like I wasn't seeing what could work. Like, again, maybe something on this side, but it's a 3-on-2, right, with the pawns. So I just wasn't seeing anything. And so we traded, and then I just tried a little bit of expansion. And I think it was in this position, actually, that my opponent finally offered a draw. And I declined because I felt like, okay, can I get my king a little more active and do something to help with some kind of expansion on this side of the board? Now, there's always, the tension between these two rooks that I have to keep in mind. But then they literally just started shuffling this rook back and forth as I was kind of going up with the king and whatever. And then once I got the king here, they pushed this pawn, and I realized I just need to tuck back, because if I put the king up here, then they can actually put me in check again. I suppose I can take that pawn in that case, but I was seeing cases where like my king ends up here and gets attacked, or this pawn keeps coming down and like they manage to get their rook to come around. And I just decided, I don't think there's anything on that side of the board that I can do. And so this is where I offered a draw, and my opponent accepted, and the game was over. And so that's the game. I hope it was interesting for you. I mean, I think it was interesting to see how my opponent really was trying for like trading off powerful pieces and just kind of making the whole game kind of sterile and non-confrontational, if that's a word, in order to really kind of push for a draw. And it turns out that they were successful in doing that. I was really wanting to find some way to break through or cause something to happen, but I just couldn't, and the game ended up in a draw. So I'm very curious to hear what you think. If maybe there's like a different opening that I need to learn against knight f3 that is going to avoid sort of these more sterile positions, or if there were ways in this game that I missed where I could have played more aggressively or caused a bit more imbalance that I could have worked with, or maybe I'm just totally overthinking it. This is just a one-off. It's just the way it went in this case, and I need to not worry about it and just move on. But in any case, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I will see you on the next video.